Now, when the PROTON X50 was launched 2 years ago, we got this very car on test. Now, back then it was a brand new car with only about 2,000 kilometers, if memory serves me correctly. And of course, at the time, it felt like a brand new car, because it was. Now, 2 years later, since launch, we have the exact same car back. Now with almost 22,000 kilometers on the clock, which means it's done an average of about 10,000 kilometers per year. Now, the thing is, a lot has changed since the X50 was first introduced. When it arrived, it embarrassed vehicles like the Honda HR-V. But now there are other competitors. The HR-V is about to be refreshed. Toyota now has the Corolla Cross, replacing the much more expensive CHR. The Subaru XV now comes with eyesight, and if you're really dumb, you could get a Renault Capture on subscription. So, with all of that in mind, we're here to answer two questions. One, how well has this X50 handled the last 2 years being used and abused as a marketing and PR car? And secondly, despite this upgraded and refreshed landscape, does the X50 still hold its own in the B-segment crossover space? My name is ABDULLAH, this is MalaysianMotoring, and this is our refresh review of the PROTON X50. Now, one of the most important parts to touch on with the X50 is its design. Now, this car is of course the flagship, which means you get all the bells and whistles, such as the radar on the front, as well as the two-tone front lip spoiler. Now, most importantly, all X50s come with a full LED headlight system, although this car also comes with automatic high beam, which makes driving at night a lot easier. Now, in terms of the design, which is actually what I wanted to talk about, it still looks fresh and it still looks really smart. Compared to the X70, which is ultimately an older car based on the Geely Boyer, which has been around for about 600 years, the X50 looks fresher and bolder. And even though it's a couple of years on, and no doubt there will be some minor change in its future, as it stands now, it still looks really good. The headlights are nice and sharp. The red element of the ethereal bow, which they say is traditional, even though archery was not really a part of our culture, is still here and it still looks good. You still get the infinite weave and you have a very bluff front end, which I think looks fantastic. The fact that the LED indicators are actually built into the daytime running lights also means that it looks quite smart. You still have LED fog lights at the bottom and you still have functional air breathers down here, which escape just before the wheel arch in order to smooth airflow over the wheels. And so the front end of this car still looks rather good. Now, down the side of the X50, that bold design character continues. You still have these strong shoulder lines that go all the way, and I love this character line that goes from the base of the A-pillar all the way to the tail lights. You still have the same 18-inch alloy wheels wrapped in Continental Ultra Contact 6 tires, 215/55R18 front and rear, and as evidence of this car's hard life, the front alloys on both sides are pretty nastily scuffed. You also get this kink back here, which is kind of like what you get on the X70, a family trait of sorts, and you get a black roof as part of this flagship model, as well as these roof rails, which are actually functional. Now, the back of the X50 is perhaps my favorite angle. I love the way this car looks with its chrome garnish that bleeds into the taillights, the LED taillights themselves with this very unique light signature, the lovely sort of very intricate spoiler, which actually has slots down here. I don't know if they're functional or not, but they certainly look good. Now, because it's a new generation Proton, they don't have the Proton badge on it anymore. It just says Proton across with X50 on one side. But aside from the black roof, there's no real telling that this is the flagship model. That said, however, you do get a rear diffuser and quad exhaust pipes, which are functional, which I think just wraps up the way this car looks rather well. Now, what is worth noting that back here is you get the EEV sticker because this is an energy efficient vehicle. However, Proton claims that this car will do 6.4 liters per 100 kilometers, which I doubt very highly unless you start off at the top of the hill and your destination is at the bottom of a hill. Now, what is worth noting about the X50, however, is that as a flagship model, you do not get a powered tailgate, which makes it rather heavy to open. But once you do open it, you do get a decent amount of space back here. This is of course smaller than the Honda HR-V, but it's still a decent amount of space. And there is no space underneath, nor a... Wait, there's some styrofoam. Hold the line collar. Then is there a... Yes, there is a space saver down here, as well as a jack and an emergency triangle should you get stuck by the roadside and need to change a flat. Although, of course, all new Protons come with Proton Roadside Assist for a certain period. And of course, if you are stuck by the side of a highway, do not attempt to change the tire on your own. Please call your insurance company to avoid any untoward incidents. Now, let's move inside where we can talk a little bit more about the X50. Now, inside the X50, it's actually still a very nice place to be. I remember when this car was launched, I was blown away by the choice of materials, like this brushed aluminium look here on the front of the dash, as well as on the center console, as well as the pleather up here on the dash in red in the flagship model, as well as the pleather on the seats and the sort of soft touch materials on the doors. It does feel really premium in here. What adds to that, of course, is the technology that's available. You have an electronic gear selector, which looks very swish, an electronic parking brake with auto hold, one of my most favorite features in any car. You also get a lovely center infotainment display, which runs GKUI 9 or 19 or 1.9, no, I can't remember. But this isn't the latest system from Acotec, but it's all right. And most importantly, it does come with QD Link, so if you have an Android phone, it does work pretty well. I think they must have updated that a few times since I drove it, because I remember it used to be a little bit buggy and now it's a lot smoother. On top of that, of course, you get a digital instrument cluster in this flagship model, which displays all of the relevant information that you need. And it's all controlled by this very nice, small but well-built steering wheel with its nice buttons and switchgear all over the place, which again feel very nice to use. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the interior of this car has aged really well, and I love the ergonomics of this thing. The fact that you still have physical dials for the air conditioning, even though it's single zone climate control, it does mean that it just feels nice. All the buttons, all the switchgear feel really good. Even the motion of the air vents feels upmarket. The only thing that lets this car down, unfortunately, is the door handles, which... Okay, that noise I can forgive. What I can't is the sound and feel of the door handles themselves. They feel really plasticky, and I feel that this is something that might break after a few years. I wish that they would have, because the ones in the X70 feel nice and solid. I wish they would do the same here. The other thing I wish they'd do is actually offer Android Auto. Now, I'm sure that Proton has a justification for this, because this system cannot run it or blah blah blah. But the simple fact of the matter is, this infotainment system is the same one that's also used in the Lotus Emira, which does come with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Wired, of course, but still better than nothing, which means you can put it here, they just don't want to give it to you. What they will give to you, however, is this nice panoramic sunroof, which I must admit still feels really premium after all these years. And I love the fact that with the high Proton system, you can open and close the sunshade or the sunroof and change various parameters in the car. It just makes it a lot easier when you can't be bothered to go into the infotainment system and do it yourself or reach out for a button. Another thing I'm appreciative of is the fact that this car comes with a sunglasses holder, which holds my signature sunglasses very well, which cannot be said of the Toyota Supra, which is a little bit weird. Now let's move to the back to talk a little bit more about practicality. Now, in the back of the X50, this seat is set up in my driving position at the national average of about 160 something or 170, I don't know, I'm not very tall. Ultimately, what that means is you get plenty of space. This seat, the rails of the front seats are actually set up quite high, so you can tuck your feet in under the seat in front of you, and in terms of knee room, it's also pretty good. Now, what is slightly unfortunate is that this seat squab, while it's molded, is a bit short, which means you do need to stretch your legs out if you want some under thigh support, and even then it doesn't go all the way to the back of your knees. The X70 does a bit better in terms of rear space for passengers. Now, what is beneficial, however, is that you do get a couple of aircon vents, a couple of USB-A ports for charging. You still get bottle holders back here as you do in the front, and if you want cup holders, they are here in the center armrest. And the center armrest itself feels rather nice. Now, for children, of course, you would like to know that there are ISOFIX mounts back here without any silly covers on them that you might lose, so it should be able to stand the test of time. However, if you are a child in a child seat, they might get a little bit sick because the shoulder line on this car is quite high, which means visibility out for toddlers might be a bit challenging. However, if they are in a child seat, they can just look straight out of that panoramic roof, and I'm sure they'll enjoy it quite a bit. Now, if you do have toddlers, you will be happy to know that apparently this car comes with, or you can get it with, little, hold the line, sun blockers for the quarter lights. Now, I don't think this is standard fit, and I frankly don't know why they're in this car. There are two of them, obviously, but the thing about the PROTON X50 is that this is a car that when it came out, it really set new standards for cars within this segment. The B segment SUV space at the time was dominated by the Honda HR-V, which it still kind of does today, and the contenders within the segment were all quite rubbish. The thing is, a lot of things have changed since then. So for example, this used to be the most powerful B segment SUV that money could buy. But then time went on and the Hyundai Kona arrived, and that became the most powerful B segment SUV that money could buy. And then the Mazda CX-3, for example, got a diesel variant, and that made it the most efficient car within the segment. And then the Honda HR-V got updated with a hybrid system, and then that became the most efficient way to get around. And of course, if you're running it in electric, it also became the most quiet. So a lot of things have changed since this car was launched. So we're back behind the wheel again to figure out whether or not it has stood the test of time, and for the most part, it has. Now, we're in the flagship variant, which means I have a panoramic sunroof, but it also means that I have the 1.5-litre turbo gasoline direct injection engine up ahead. This is the more powerful of the two 1.5-litre engines available for the X50. And this car produces about 177 PS or something to that effect. The numbers will be stated now. And it certainly does feel like a very punchy thing. Now, of course, this is ultimately a 3-cylinder, which means that, of course, you do get some of that characteristic flair from a 3-cylinder. So, for example, when you're stationary, there is a little bit of vibration that comes through the pedals and the steering wheel and a little bit through your bum. Although if your bum is well padded as mine, you won't really feel it. But more importantly, you get a very almost instantaneous serving of torque. Now, this is of course aided by the fact that this is, like I said earlier, a turbo engine, which means that a lot of its torque kicks in from very low down in the rev range. This is also aided by the fact that this gearbox, this engine is paired to a 7-speed dual clutch automatic gearbox, and this gearbox is for the most part quite intelligent in terms of how it selects its ratios and when it selects its ratios. When you're driving through town, like I am now, it slushes between the gears so seamlessly that you would think that this is just a regular torque converter automatic. But when you need it to respond quickly, when you want it to be fast, this gearbox responds very, very swiftly indeed. And I do believe that this is perhaps the best pairing for a car like this, a compact crossover like this. It will be driven most of the time in town, but then every once in a while taken out on the motorway. Now, when you're driving through town, you will also appreciate the fact that the ride in this car is surprisingly plush. Now, if you were to get into a Mazda CX-3, for example, you will find that the ride is on the firmer side. It's not uncomfortable, but it's on the firmer side. But this is soft, surprisingly soft. I think for a car with a Proton badge, and therefore, you know, the promise of Proton ride and handling, you wouldn't expect it to be quite as cosseting and floaty as this car is, but it is, and it does it really well, because what that means is when you're driving in town, it soaks up the worst lumps and bumps, even in PJ, without much concern. And it also means that when you're on the motorway, the car sort of just glides over the very worst imperfections. Now, when you're on the motorway, however, this car does reveal one of its flaws, and that is the fact that, unfortunately, the rolling refinement, for example, is not that bad in this car. However, the wind noise is not so great. So the wind whistle specifically that you get from the rear view mirrors is very pronounced, and it starts at just 80 kilometers an hour. Now, Malaysians generally drive quite fast, which means 80 kilometers an hour is a pretty normal speed that one could achieve even when driving to work in the morning. So to have a very prominent wind noise at that speed is quite irritating. That's number one. Number two is the fact that when you are driving at speed, the steering wheel in this car does not weight up as naturally as one would expect, which means that it is a little bit more difficult to place the car on the motorway, and it's a bit more difficult when you're trying to take corners at high speed. Now, the car is very stable, no doubt, but it just lacks that sort of pinpoint confidence that you'd expect from a Proton, especially from a Proton. But the good news is, however, everything in here is very comfortable. I do appreciate the driving position, which in this car is unusually high. A lot of crossovers want you to sit kind of a little bit lower, so you feel a little bit more costed, so it feels a bit more car-like. But in the X50, it asks you, it demands you almost to sit a little bit higher, because if you sit lower, you'll find that you can't quite adjust the mirrors the right way. Sit a little bit higher, you have a very commanding driving position all the way around, and your visibility is pretty good too. And all in all, it makes it for a pretty good experience. On top of that, like I said, the refinement in this car, aside from the wind whistle, is pretty good, which means as you're traveling along, this car does feel quite plush. This is also aided by the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, the interior of this car is appointed really well, and it does make the car feel a lot more expensive and upmarket than its price might suggest. The one major downside to this car, however, is fuel economy. Now, one may rather accurately assume that if an engine is good in town, it is not going to be good on the motorway, or if an engine is good on the motorway, it's not going to be good in town. Unfortunately, this car doesn't seem to be really good anywhere in terms of fuel economy. Now, we've had this car for a little while now. Let me just get the fuel economy figures here. And yeah, we've had this car for some period of time, 611 kilometers, and our average fuel consumption has been 9.9 liters per 100 kilometers, as stated on the screen now. And this is despite the fact that we've driven this car both in town and out of town motorway journeys and stuff like that. And so we've done a decent mix of driving, and 9.9 is still quite high for a car like this. The Mazda CX-3 can do better fuel economy. The Peugeot 2008 with a 1.2 litre 3-cylinder turbocharged engine would average about 7.5 to 7.7 litres per 100 kilometers over a similar drive. This car, as I said, has an unusually high fuel consumption, and we're not entirely sure what that's down to, because this car is no heavier than its competitors, at least not unusually so. It's also not exactly giving you supercar levels of performance, therefore demanding that sort of fuel economy. And it just seems a little bit weird. And I guess if you're driving in town, you might want something a little bit more frugal. As I mentioned earlier, the Peugeot 2008 does better fuel consumption, and naturally so does the Honda HR-V Hybrid. And of course, this will be improved when the new generation model comes out. And that, I feel, is a bit of a sticking point. You see, you'd buy a Proton X50 for two reasons. One, because you realize it is excellent value, especially with its advanced driver assist features and level 2 semi-autonomy and its ability to drive itself in traffic. Or you would buy an X50 because this is the best car that you can afford. Now, if you're in the latter category, where you realize that instead of buying a Honda HR-V or a Mazda CX-3 or a Peugeot 2008, you'll save 30,000 ringgit and buy one of these instead because you have 9/10 of the experience. You are probably the kind of person who will pay attention to fuel economy. And while 20,000 ringgit is a significant saving, one must ask the question, just how many kilometers does that translate into if you're running the car on RON 95? About 10,000 liters of fuel, if over a period of 9 to 10 years, or if you intend to own the car for longer, that might make a difference. And then on top of that, you have to also consider Proton service quality. Now, I hate to bring this up because I know that Proton is doing its level best to try and improve after-sales service. Unfortunately, at the time of filming, after-sales service remains a sticking point when it comes to Protons. When I find friends, or when friends come to me asking about the X50 and whether or not it's a good purchase within this segment, I always have to tell them the same thing, which is, on paper, it is a better car. Because for the money, it offers you either more space, more practicality, more refinement, or better safety features. But after-sales service plays a very important role in terms of how you perceive the quality of ownership. And as someone who has owned luxury cars, mass market cars, and when I say mass market, I've owned Prodoas, I've owned Nissans, I've owned Toyotas, I remember distinctly an experience I had with a mass market Japanese brand where I would have expected there to be decent service quality, particularly as I was coming out of my Prodoa. And despite the fact that this was ultimately a car that was 2.5 times more expensive than the car I just upgraded from, the service quality was awful. And because of that, I sold the car within 2 years because I didn't want to live with this anymore. The act of living with the car was infuriating. And when it comes to Proton, among friends of mine that have bought X70s, X50s, Personas, Sagas and all that, it seems to be a mixed bag. If you get a good one, you're not going to have any issues whatsoever. I've got a friend with a X70 CKD. He's never had to make a warranty claim because the car has been faultless, and he does drive his car pretty rough. On the other hand, I have friends who baby their cars, and their Protons have had to go in for multiple warranty claims, and when they do, the part supply situation exacerbates an already terrible scenario. So you have to bear that in mind. But if we were to evaluate this car on paper alone, the X50 continues to justify its place and its position within the marketplace. The fact that this car comes with one of the most comprehensive safety suites of any car on the market, especially within this segment, means that you absolutely cannot run away from this. You cannot close your eyes and ignore it. But when you take that into account, sorry, not a but actually, when you take this car's comprehensive safety and then you pair that to the fact that this car is very refined and very comfortable, and in terms of spaciousness, I mean, you can have a growing family in this, and the boot is decently large enough, and this powertrain is punchy enough for both town usage like day-to-day driving as well as the occasional long balik kampung drive. It means that the sheer versatility of the X50 means that this is not a car that you can ignore. By going the route of a non-national brand for the sake of driving a non-national brand, it is like cutting off your nose to spite your face, because this is a properly impressive car. Even friends of mine who do not like Proton, whom I gave the opportunity to test drive this car while I've had it, have said exactly the same thing. It's really good and you simply cannot ignore it. That said, however, if you listen to what I said earlier and you're slightly concerned when it comes to service quality, then you might be better served by something from Burma's, for example, like a Mazda CX-30 or a Peugeot 2008, or at some point I'm sure they'll offer a compact Kia. Or perhaps maybe consider the Toyota Corolla Cross, which is technically one segment size larger, but in terms of pricing somehow falls within the B segment crossover space. If you want something that's more frugal, then definitely consider the Peugeot 2008, because the 1.2-litre PureTech engine is amazingly frugal. And if you want the latest and greatest, or if you want a hybrid system, consider the new Honda HR-V, which at the time of filming will be launched relatively soon, because I've no doubt that the e-HEV system in that car will be a lot more frugal, especially when you're driving around in town. But if you want a car that has raised the bar within the segment, both in terms of comfort as well as refinement, and has also largely embarrassed the competition in terms of active safety features, that the Proton X50 remains a car to look at. You should absolutely shortlist a vehicle like this if you're buying within this segment, because it is very good, and if you don't try it out, you will probably live to regret it. In any case, that's been the Malaysian Motoring review of the Proton X50, now in 2022. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon so that you're notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We will catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe. Jangan bodoh.